Officer Dean Harding wore his badge like a crown and believed the law was whatever he said it was. His deep-seated prejudice was a weapon he kept loaded, aimed squarely at a changing world he despised. But on this day, he aimed it at a man who wasn't just another face in the crowd. He targeted the one man who was the system itself, and in doing so, he lit the fuse on his own destruction. On a sweltering Thursday afternoon in Bridgeport, Officer Harding rolled his Ford Interceptor sedan down a street he'd lorded over for a decade. He took a sip of burnt, lukewarm coffee, the sour taste a perfect match for his mood, and spat a brown arc onto the asphalt. That's when his eyes locked on him. The man stood with an unnerving calm in front of a brightly lit electronics store. He was a black man, dressed in a tailored charcoal blazer and shoes that cost more than Harding's last 2 car payments. He held a sleek leather briefcase, his voice a low murmur into a brand new smartphone. He wasn't drawing attention. He wasn't bothering a soul. He was simply there. And for Dean Harding, that was more than enough. Who the hell does this guy think he is? Harding's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. Dudes like that don't just hang around this part of Bridgeport. Not unless they're moving product or scouting a score. The man's quiet confidence felt like a direct slap to Harding's authority. He slammed the cruiser to a halt. His pulse didn't just quicken. It began to hammer with a familiar, ugly thrill. The decision was already made. Forgetting the radio, ignoring the complete lack of probable cause, Harding's hand went to his service weapon. He was the law on this block, and class was in session. He didn't exit the vehicle, he erupted from it. The door flew open with a metallic shriek as Harding hit the pavement, his pistol already in a 2-handed grip. There was no protocol, no, "Sir, I need to see some ID." No shouted command to halt. Those courtesies were for people he saw as actual citizens. Harding's mind, poisoned by years of simmering resentment, had already convicted his target. This wasn't a person, it was a problem to be erased. You don't reason with vermin, the thought hissed in his head. You crush it. He covered the space between them in 5 aggressive strides. Hands in the air. You, get on the damn ground, now, he roared, his voice thick with a fury that had been building all shift. The man didn't flinch. He didn't bolt. He simply lowered his phone, the movement so deliberate it was insulting. A crease formed on his brow, not from fear, but from what looked like genuine bewilderment, as if Harding were a rabid dog that had just wandered into his path. His gaze was solid, his face a mask of composure. He finally spoke, his voice steady and clear. "Officer, is there a problem?" The question, so devoid of the terror Harding expected, was like throwing fuel on a bonfire. "You think you can play games with me?" Harding spat, closing the distance until the barrel of his gun was just inches from the man's chest. "I'm talking to you. What's in the damn briefcase? Dope? A burner?" He didn't give the man time to respond. "I know how you people operate. You're all dirty." Passers-by were stopping now. Out of the corner of his eye, Harding saw the dark lenses of cell phones rising like a silent jury. He couldn't care less. Let them watch. Let them see how a real cop handles the street. "Drop the case," he screamed, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Drop it now, or I swear to God I'll put you down right here, you worthless punk." The man didn't comply. He drew a slow, measured breath, his eyes locked on Harding's. When he spoke again, his voice had a new weight to it. A low, resonant authority that seemed to suck the air out of the street. "Officer," the man said slowly, "let me give you some advice. You are about to make the most catastrophic mistake of your career." Harding let out a harsh, barking laugh, a sound dripping with contempt. "A mistake?" he sneered, his lip curling back. "The only mistake was you showing your face on my beat. I don't need advice from some hustler in a cheap suit." Harding shifted his stance, the rough grip of his pistol digging into his palm as he centered the sight on the man's chest. A thick vein throbbed in his neck. Sweat dripped down his temples. This wasn't the sweat of exertion. It was the sweat of pure, unbridled rage. "That suit doesn't make you a damn thing," Harding hissed, gesturing with his weapon toward the man's polished shoes. "You think you can just stand here, on my block, and look down on me?" He took another step, invading the man's space. "I've met 100 of you. You think the rules don't apply to you." The man in the suit, Samuel Cole, remained perfectly still. A muscle jumped in his clenched jaw, but his eyes were like granite. He said nothing. He just breathed. a slow, controlled inhale through his nose, a long, steady exhale. It was the calm of a man who had faced down bullies like Harding his entire life. It was a calm that was its own weapon. This silence, this absolute refusal to be intimidated, was more than Harding could stomach. He's looking right through me, the officer thought, his fury twisting into a personal insult. Like I'm garbage. Me, a decorated officer. He raised his pistol higher, the front sight now aimed directly between Samuel Cole's eyes. "What's the matter?" he taunted, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Tongue-tied now? Not so bold without your fancy talk, are you?" From the doorway of a nearby bodega, a woman held her phone to her chest, whispering frantically into it. "He's going to kill him," she choked out. "The man isn't doing anything. The cop is unhinged. Please, send someone." Harding heard only the blood roaring in his ears. Cole's gaze lifted for a fraction of a second, a flicker toward the sky, before locking back onto Harding's eyes. The absolute certainty in them was more terrifying than the gun itself. A low, prophetic voice cut through the tension. "You will answer for every word." "I doubt it," Harding snarled, his finger resting on the trigger. He had the gun. He had the badge. He had the power. But the man's unbreakable calm was a silent judgment, a rejection of everything Harding stood for. The tension in the air stretched thin, vibrated, and then shattered. "I've had enough of your damn mouth," Harding shrieked, his voice tearing as every last shred of his professional composure burned away into pure animal rage. And without another thought, he fired. Samuel Cole's body snapped back from the force of the bullet, a single violent convulsion. His eyes flew open, not in terror, but in a sharp, shocked intake of breath. The leather briefcase fell from his hand, hitting the sidewalk with a muffled thud. A dark crimson flower immediately bloomed on the left shoulder of his blazer, the stain spreading like wildfire across the expensive fabric. He collapsed to his knees with a low, guttural groan, a sound not of surrender, but of sheer, focused will, and clamped a hand over the bleeding wound. Officer Harding stood over him, weapon still extended, his breath coming in ragged, shallow pants. He stared down at the kneeling man as if he'd just exterminated a pest that had dared to crawl across his boot. A sneer of triumph twisted his lips. "There," he panted, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "That's how you learn some respect." For one long second, the street was dead silent. Then a new sound sliced through the humid air, the rising scream of sirens, and they were getting closer. Fast. Harding didn't register it at first. He was lost in the glow of his victory, a part of his brain confused that the confrontation wasn't over. Then his own radio crackled, a distorted, panicked voice blasting from the cruiser. "Unit 12, drop your weapon. Harding, I repeat, drop your weapon now." Harding's sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. What the hell? He took a step back, his eyes scanning the street. The sirens were a deafening wall of sound now. Red and blue lights strobed wildly against the buildings as two patrol cars and a heavy, unmarked black SUV screeched to a halt, boxing him in completely. Doors were thrown open and armed officers poured out, but they weren't looking at the wounded man on the ground. Every single weapon, a dozen steel barrels gleaming in the harsh sun, was aimed directly at Officer Dean Harding. "On the ground, Harding! Do it now!" An officer bellowed through a megaphone. "Drop your weapon!" Another screamed. Harding's world spun. He stood frozen, his own gun still clutched in his hand, his mind refusing to process the impossible scene. "What are you doing?" he yelled, his voice cracking with disbelief. "He's the perp. I have a hostile suspect. I am the officer here." On the pavement, in a spreading pool of his own blood, Samuel Cole slowly raised his head, and for the first time a grim, knowing smile touched his lips. "Last chance, Harding," a sergeant yelled, advancing cautiously. "You are under arrest for the unjustified shooting of an unarmed civilian." "He pushed me to it," Harding screamed back, stumbling backward, his eyes wild with panic. "You don't get it. He was acting like he owned the place. They all do." While the other officers kept Harding covered, a man in a tactical vest broke from the line, holstered his rifle, and sprinted to Samuel Cole's side. He knelt on the bloody pavement, his face a mask of grim urgency. "We need medics now," he shouted to the others, his voice tight. "GSW to the upper chest, possible arterial bleed." He tried to apply pressure to the wound, But Cole, gritting his teeth against the pain, grabbed the man's arm with shocking strength. "No, wait," he gasped. "Sir, you need to lie still. An ambulance is en route," the agent insisted. Cole looked past him, his gaze locking onto Dean Harding's stunned face. Though his voice was a strained rasp, every officer on the scene heard the unbreakable authority in his words. "Get Chief Dempsey on the phone, right now." He paused, taking a ragged breath. "Tell him the lead FBI agent on his precinct's corruption case has just been shot." Harding's mind went blank. The words didn't compute. FBI agent? Case? It made no sense. Cole's eyes, burning with a cold fire, met Harding's. "You put your hands on me," he said, each word a shard of ice. "You threatened me, and you shot me, all because you couldn't stand the sight of me." He coughed, a grimace of pain tightening his features. "Now, you're going to pay the price." A desperate, panicked denial clawed its way up Harding's throat. "No! He's lying!" he stammered, his eyes darting wildly between the other officers. "He can't be! He's just some guy!" That was the final straw. The tactical officers collapsed on him in a wave of coordinated force, wrenching the pistol from his hand and slamming him face down onto the gritty sidewalk. The cold steel of handcuffs bit deep into his wrists. One of the agents spoke calmly into his radio. "Command, we have confirmation. The package is secure." Instantly, the entire dynamic of the scene changed. The wounded man was no longer a victim. He was the mission. "Sir, the bus is 30 seconds out," the first agent said, his voice now filled with a stark reverence. "Just hold on, Agent Cole." At Metro General Hospital, the trauma bay was a flurry of controlled chaos. "Bullet passed clean through, but it's nicked the subclavian artery," the head surgeon commanded. "Get me 2 units of O negative and prep for a vascular clamp now." As a nurse cut away the blood-soaked blazer, she saw the ID clipped to his belt. Her eyes widened in shock. "Doctor," she breathed, her voice trembling. "My God, look, this is Supervisory Special Agent Samuel Cole from the FBI." The surgeon didn't look up from his work, his face grim. "Then for this city's sake," he said gravely, "he better live." Final. At the Bureau's national headquarters in Quantico, the news of the shooting didn't just land, it detonated. A top clearance file was activated on a secure FBI server, its contents known only to the highest levels of command. Name: Cole Samuel. Title: Supervisory Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Current assignment: lead undercover agent investigating the 12th Precinct for a pattern of systemic corruption, civil rights violations, and racist enforcement. Officer Dean Harding, a man with a thick but deeply buried file of civilian complaints, had just made himself Exhibit A in the very case he refused to believe existed. At 2:00 a.m., Dean Harding sat shivering in a sterile, freezing holding cell, stripped of his uniform, his badge, and his gun. The man he had been for 20 years was gone. A federal agent in a sharp suit entered and slid a thick, heavy folder onto the steel table. Harding didn't have to open it. He knew what it was. Every hushed-up complaint, every racial slur, every act of brutality he thought he had gotten away with. "They're going to bury me," Harding whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The agent looked at him, his expression utterly devoid of pity. "No," he said, his voice flat and cold. "You just lit your own fuse." Miles away, Samuel Cole stood at his hospital window, his arm in a sling, watching the lights of Bridgeport blur into the night. His encrypted phone buzzed. It was a message from his team. "The media is circling. We're ready to break the story." He typed a short reply. "Hold. I want to be standing when the building falls." A young, nervous-looking Bridgeport officer stood guard at his door. "Sir?" the officer asked, his voice barely a whisper. "With all due respect, is the investigation over?" Cole turned from the window, his eyes like chips of flint. "I didn't come here to get shot, son," he said. "I came here to clean house." "Just one more thing, sir," the officer ventured. "How did you know Harding was, you know?" A sad, weary look crossed Cole's face. "I didn't," he replied softly. "But for a man like that, my skin is the only provocation he needs." The next day, the storm broke. At a press conference jammed with cameras and reporters, Samuel Cole walked to the podium, his sling a stark, undeniable symbol of the violence he had faced. "Yesterday, an officer of the 12th Precinct shot me while I was performing my duties for the Federal Bureau of Investigation," he began, his voice calm and powerful. The room went silent. He didn't know my name. He didn't know my title. He saw my skin color, and for him, that was probable cause. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. As of this morning, the FBI has taken operational control of the investigation into the 12th precinct. The abuse of power is a cancer, and I didn't come here to heal. I came here to operate. Months later, Dean Harding stood before a federal judge. The arrogant, swaggering cop was gone, replaced by a pale, hollowed-out shell of a man in an orange jumpsuit. In the gallery, Samuel Cole sat watching, his face unreadable. The judge's voice was like cracking stone as he delivered the verdict in the sentence. 25 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of parole. Harding didn't shout. He didn't protest. He simply folded, his shoulders collapsing as the full, crushing weight of his life's choices finally broke him. The system he thought he served had devoured him whole. Weeks into his sentence, a letter arrived for Harding at the federal prison. It bore the official seal of the FBI. Inside was a single sheet of paper. One sentence was highlighted in yellow. You weren't a mistake. You were the lesson.